Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library, and it is my pleasure to present our speaker for today, Lace Gebhard from the Hunterdon County Master Gardeners. Lace is a retired from the corporate world after 38 years of service and was looking for a volunteer opportunity that fit with her lifestyle. She loves gardening, and with her husband, they own and operate a small choose and cut Christmas tree farm. The Rutgers Master Gardener program was a perfect fit, and Lace became a Master Gardener in 2015. She is active on the presentation team, the new class team, and co-leads the sensory garden team. So welcome, Lace. Thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to talk to our patrons today. And it's a very apt topic with Valentine's Day coming up. Talking about the language of flowers, how flowers have been used throughout history to communicate many different things. So we're excited to see what you have to present. Before we jump into Lace's presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. I have been provided with a handout that I will upload to the chat once we get underway, and you can download it from there. If you have problems downloading it from the chat, don't worry, it'll be available in a follow-up email as well. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted for a survey. If you have time, we ask you please complete the survey. We always love hearing your feedback. And if you want for more information on anything related to gardening, you can visit the Hunterdon County Master Gardeners page at the web address on the screen there. I will also send that out in the chat so that you have a live link to it. And then one last thing I have to go over is just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure that they're connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you run into any issues, there is a raise hand button in the middle. You can click on that. That'll alert me, and I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to solve any problems that you are having. And as I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, there is the Q&A and the chat buttons. You can use either of them to get in touch with us, and we'll address those questions at the end of Lace's presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Lace now. All right.
Are we on or?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
Are you
I
back
don't
into
see it yet.
if you click on the bottom, if you click the Zoom logo again to get back into Zoom.
Okay,
And then you should have the green share screen button.
I don't see it.
Try going into full screen mode again. I think it'll pop up.
Okay,
And you should be able to hit the share screen and then click the PowerPoint window. All right. And then you can start your slideshow.
okay, I
All
think
right.
that's it.
Yep, we're all set.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm sorry for this little bit of confusion at the beginning. I'm not very computer literate, but I wanted to start by just saying a couple of words about the Master Gardener program. We used research-based horticulture information to share with the general public, to educate them on horticulture and to answer any of their questions and needs regarding their gardens and other cultural questions. We do this in a number of ways. We have a helpline that folks can call into or visit. It's a fully staffed library and microscopes so that we can actually do research for them and answer any questions that they may have. We also do a lot of horticulture information through schools and senior groups, providing them with horticulture information and answering questions. We have demonstrations and lectures, and this is one of the lectures that I will be doing today from the presentation team. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to be talking about the language of flowers. As we approach Valentine's Day, the sale of roses will certainly hit a high, probably second to chocolate. But why are roses so popular on Valentine's Day, and especially the red ones? Well, we'll get to that. Herbs and flowers have been used throughout the ages to convey messages of beauty and love offered at happy occasions and occasions of sadness as symbols of love and friendship, encouragement and hope. The language of flowers is used today as it has always been through the centuries. Flowers serve as messengers when words will not suffice or cannot be spoken. Today, I'll be discussing flowers as we use them in everyday life. I'll also talk about some of the history and the origin of flowers, and then we'll talk about the Victorian era where flowers were the language of love. So I'm going to start with how we use flowers today in our everyday lives. We use them to celebrate occasions. This happens to be a bouquet that my husband gave me for our anniversary a couple of years ago. And again, it is used to convey best wishes, love, affection on birthdays, holidays of other types, anniversaries, confirmation, weddings. The list is endless where you can use flowers to communicate well wishes. We also see flowers in other locations. This happens to be Longwood Gardens, where I visit several times. This happened to be at Christmas, but again, conservatories and botanical gardens are wonderful places to view florals, flower arrangements, and enjoy flowers. We receive a lot, get a lot of good feelings from visiting gardens and enjoying the floral arrangements, not only in large gardens like Longwood Gardens, but in private gardens as well. This happens to be a garden in a private home where my nephew was married. It is quite lovely garden. One of the things you might notice is there are no flowers at this time. So when I talk about the language of flowers, I include not only floral annuals and perennials, but also shrubs and herbs and trees. So pretty much all foliage is under this umbrella of language of flowers. This happens to be my own private garden. We, as gardeners, we do enjoy growing flowers and viewing them and appreciating the beauty of flowers. We also use flowers in our homes to enhance the beauty of the homes. These are my orchids that happen to be in bloom all at the same time, which very fortunate that that happens. We also see flowers in other parts of our lives, in literature, in art, and in music. So I'll just go through some of those examples as well. In this particular case, this painting was done in the 1500s. And at that time, artists were using flowers in arrangements for their specific symbolism. During the Victorian era, artists often painted maidens who were holding flowers because the flowers were representing love, affection, friendship. And in this case, they're roses. We also see flowers evident in literature, starting with the Bible. References go back to the Bible. I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys, like a lily among thorns, so my darling among maidens, from Song of Solomon. Also in Shakespeare, Shakespeare used more than the word flower more than 100 times in his plays. In Hamlet, Ophelia mentions and explains the symbolic meaning of pansies, roses, rosemary, fennel, columbine, and other flowers. Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, Emily Dickinson, they all use flowers in their writings. These ladies were avid gardeners as well. And in many cases in their books, they would substitute the name of a flower for its meaning, assuming that the reader also knew that this particular flower had a meaning. Examples include snowdrops, which meant hopeful, crocuses, which meant cheerful, and pansies, which meant preoccupied. We also have 20th century authors that have written and included flowers in their works. Steinbeck wrote the chrysanthemum, Hemingway, the rose and its thorns, Janet Finch White Orlando, just to name a few. Recently, I've read a book by Vanessa Diffenbach, who actually got me started in the language of flowers. And it's a very sweet little novel where she is works in a florist, and she's studied the meaning of flowers and tries to help people with arrangements that have special meaning for their recipients. In addition, we see flowers in poetry. And this is just an example, red and white roses, where the roses are symbolic of a special meaning. You know, red, the flames are still feeding, red express my anguish, white, my innocence. And we have flowers in music.
I want some red roses for a blue lady, best of flowers.
So I'm sure I'm dating myself with that song, but it's one that was very popular during the time. But there are many others that have flowers in it. Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Peter, Paul, and Mary. And one of my other favorites is You Don't Bring Me Flowers Anymore by Streisand and Neil Diamond. We also have idioms. Idioms that are very common, fresh as a daisy or pushing up daisies. Here are a couple of others that are not quite as common, arose by any other name, meaning the names of things that do not reflect what they really are. Gild the lily, decorating something that is already ornate. A bed of roses, a easy and luxurious life. Gone to seed, decline in quality of appearance, and the last one, rose-colored glasses. Now I want to move on to the origin of the meaning of flowers. Throughout history, flowers have had different meanings for different different times and in different groups. Egyptians believed the divine power was contained in the floral scent, all the way through early Christians regarding flowers with suspicion, and into the Victorian era where flowers were the language of love. The handout that Andrew is going to give you actually is a little bit more detailed, and it includes a chronological history and the origins of the language of flowers, just for your perusal. So what I'm going to do now is go into 8 flowers that I have chosen because they have an interesting story, an interesting history, or their derivation I've found to be interesting as well. The meanings of flowers come from various sources, everything from the hieroglyphics to mythology, the Bible, the actual appearance of the flower, legends and folklore, myths, and so on and so forth. So I've tried to choose some that have a variety of different sources. And the first one is this one, which is an iris. Iris has always been a symbol of authority and religious belief. Iris has been named since the 2nd century BC, and it's probably the longest survived name that hasn't changed since that time. Iris is named after the messenger of the gods, whose name was Iris. And it's based on the various iridescent colors in the flower, the purples and yellows and silvers of the flower. And Iris was a messenger of the god, and she tried to connect heaven and earth. This is Narcissus It's a symbol of vanity and death, and is regarded as a flower of the spirits of the underworld. The story behind this is in Greek mythology, the tale of Narcissus, who was supposed to be married to the nymph Echo, although he rejected her. The gods became very upset with him. And one day, as he was walking along a path of the a pond, he became so gross with his own reflection, and bending over, he fell into the pond. Instead of resurfacing, the gods set up a flower in its place. And that flower has become the symbol of vanity and death. This is a peony. Throughout antiquity, the peony is associated with the Apollo of the god of light. It then became associated with the physician of the gods Paeon, for which the flower is named. Paeon recognized the healing powers of the roots and seeds of the flower and used it to cure Hades, the god of the underworld. It is believed to unite the forces of dark and light. Marigold, meaning the first day of the month. This came about because it's possible to tell the time of day by examining the flower head, which follows the course of the sun. In the 14th century hymn likened marigold to the Virgin Mary. The name then became Mary's gold, which then became marigold. Since the 12th century, it has been used as a medicinal plant. The teas helped reduce inflammation and minor injuries, Continuing in the 21st century, there's research still being done on the marigold for its potential anti-cancer and antiviral properties. Next is the columbine. It's planted in gardens of monasteries and castles from the 12th century on, and it was considered a medicinal plant and garden flower. It was used as protection both against evil spirits that sapped a man's strength and as an aphrodisiac, in a monastery, which I thought was very interesting. And this is thistle. In fairy tales, thistles sometimes symbolize an enduring love that, despite pain and suffering, continues to grow and grow. In 19th century, young maidens that were having difficult time choosing a spouse, if she had 4 or 5 or even 6 suitors, she would cut a new branch or new twig off of the thistle plant and associate each branch or twig that she cut off with one of those suitors' names. She would then put those pieces under her pillow at night, and the next morning, the piece that grew was associated with the suitor that she would be marrying. Violets. In the Middle Ages, the violet was regarded as a sign of humility and modesty. It represents the humility of the Virgin Mary and her determination. It is a self-pollinating plant, which is an unusual feature and is symbolic of the Virgin Mary's Immaculate Conception. Shakespeare saw the violet as a symbol of innocence and love. It is the state flower of New Jersey. The rose. Beauty and fragrance have made the rose a symbol of love. In her love nest, Cleopatra had her pillows filled with rose petals. The Romans used roses for decorative garlands and wreaths in their lively feasts. Nero had rose petals fall from the ceiling on his guests. To Christians, the rose was the epitome of Roman decadence and was something to be shameful of. However, the rose became people's most popular flower, and that belief was stronger than the Christian belief. So red roses came to symbolize the Virgin Mary's suffering, white roses her joy, and virgins devoted to God were given the name of Rose. So those are the 8 that I thought had an interesting story with them. The next thing I want to do is talk a little bit more about roses and specifically. And there are over 50 species of roses of many different colors. Other flowers have come in colors as well. Carnations, tulips, poppies, lilies, violets, just to name a few. There are many others that also come in a variety of colors. Not only does the flower have its own meaning, but the color of that flower has a meaning. Typically, it's in the same vein as with roses. Roses typically mean affection, love, friendship. But all roses have those general meanings. The colors of the flowers really determine the exact meaning. So I thought we could go through these 7 and match up the color with the flower, with the meaning of the flower. And typically I do this with a group and I have the group answer me, but because we can't do it that way, I'm just going to go through them for you. White means purity and innocence. A yellow flower means friendship. It's very nice to receive a bouquet of yellow flowers from a friend. Peach means modesty and sympathy. Orange means fascination and desire. Red and white, unity, integrity. Pink, grace and gentleness. And of course, red, passionate love, which explains why there are so many red roses being sold in the next couple of weeks for Valentine's Day. This slide actually shows it's more current, and it shows some of those species or cultivars that have been grown more recently that have unusual colors. Rainbow roses, for example, it's a modern creation where the meaning varies depending upon the colors that are on the rose. This is just to give you an idea of the different varieties and different colors of the cultivars. So next, I want to talk about some cultural meanings of flowers. The black hellebore was used by ancients to purify their houses. They would steep the flower in water to make a tea, so to speak, to drive away the evil spirits in their homes. The cherry blossoms in Japan, in particular, the delicate flowers represent life itself. They have many festivals during the 2 weeks that cherries are in bloom. And these festivals take place across the entire country. Because they bloom only 2 weeks, they represent life itself. Shockingly beautiful and heartbreakingly fleeting. Marigolds in Mexico, Latin America, Aztecs grow orange marigolds to remember their deceased. They believe that the marigolds help guide the souls of their loved ones home. Mimosa, it's a sensitive plant. If you touch the leaves, they close up, and that's because it's called the sensitive plants, because as the leaves close up, it represents chastity and closing up at night or when touched. Different cultures have different meanings for the same plant. This is a basil. And in Italy, basil means best wishes. In Greece, it means hatred. And in India, it is sacred. And for Victorians, flowers were the language of love. So we're going to move on and talk about Victorians and the language of love. One might ask, well, where did all this start? Well, it was started with this woman, Lady Wortley Montagu. She was a feminist during the 1700s. She was married to the English ambassador to Turkey, and they spent several years from 1717 to 1718 in Constantinople. She learned this harem game or language called salam, which was used by the harem ladies amongst themselves under the noses of their guards. And the language was developed by them by substituting flowers for words or sentiments. So instead of saying words, they would use a flower or even another object like a a glass, or I don't know if they had glasses, but other objects around to represent words that the guards would not understand. Lady Wortley Montague became enhanced, really fascinated with this language of salam, and she ended up writing many letters back to England to her friends in England and France, discussing and writing about the use of flowers to communicate and to communicate emotions. This resulted in the florography, which is a means to communicate through floral arrangements. Her letters were published in 1763 after her death, and the language of flowers became very popular. Florography became very popular because the culture of the time in England in particular was very strict. During the Victorian era, there were many rules and customs that folks had to follow. This applies mostly to the upper class in England. Recall that at that time there were just two classes, the working class and the upper class, and the upper class had to follow proper etiquette. So proclaiming your feelings was really taboo, and they expressed their intimacy through flowers. They used coded messages in flower arrangements and plants that they would send, with the idea that the recipient would understand what that flower meant. So the meanings of these flowers and the symbolism was assigned to the flower was a way for the Victorians to play the subtle game of courtship and do it in secret. Now, the giver and the recipient of the blooms had this secret way to communicate, but they needed dictionaries to understand the meanings. One thing that was important was to make sure they each had the same dictionary, because dictionaries at the time were actually creations by authors who gathered historical information, either from myths or the Bible or legend, to understand or to define the actual meaning of a flower. If two different authors could not find a particular meaning, they often made one up. So dictionaries could have conflicting information and conflicting meanings. So it was important for the recipient as well as the sender to have the same dictionary. Otherwise, the message could be misunderstood. The most popular dictionary of the time during the Victorian era was a dictionary by Louise excuse me, I don't know French, but Madame Charlotte de la Tour was her pen name, and she wrote this huge volume in 1819. It became very popular not only in Europe, but also in the United States. Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there were over 98 florography dictionaries in the United States alone. This happens to be a language of flowers book that I found in the library. It is still being printed to this day. It was written in 1884 by Kate Greenway, who was a children's artist and illustrator and writer. And she wrote this book where she just defined alphabetically all the flowers that she found, I guess, and defined them just with one or two words. In this particular case, she included all kinds of foliage. So you can see that she used daisies, dandelion. She even included dead leaves and dogwoods. Other dictionaries of the time not only included the meaning of a word, of a flower, but they also included botanical information, how to grow them, some of the history, the origin of the name. So this was a more simplified version. Nevertheless, it was a lovely little book that I was able to get out of the library and did enjoy reading. So the language of love was complicated, and it was difficult to decipher the meaning of a bouquet, and it was very challenging. But we need to recall that at that time, we're talking about the extreme upper class who were able to do this. The lower class, the working people, were worried more about, feeding their families, and not making lovely bouquets. But for the upper class, botany became very popular, and young women in finishing schools learned not only the historical uses and symbolism, but they also learned painting and other arts. They needed to be able to identify a flower on sight and understand its meaning as well. In order to satisfy this need for flowers, many conservatories and private gardens flourished. They were huge gardens. They often imported flowers from the tropics just to have them, to be able to grow them in their conservatories. In addition, street markets became very popular. And this is just a nice painting of a street market, and I think it shows the difference between the upper class and the lower class in this painting as well. So one of the ways that they demonstrated the symbols and offered flowers to someone, the recipient, was through a little bouquet, and these little bouquets were called a variety of names: posies, nosegays, tussie-mussies, or a talking bouquet. Nosegay was a name that was given to these little bouquets because they were often worn on the chest, kind of by the nose, and it was there used to camouflage body odor at the time. They didn't shower as frequently as we do today. They were also called tussie-mussies, and this was based on historic definitions, because the English dictionary defines a tussie-mussie, which is spelled Tuzzzy, as a bunch of a spray of flowers. And it first appeared in 1440. The tusk part of it represents a tuft of grass, and the muss was represented the moss that is sometimes surrounding the stems in a tussie-mussie to keep the stems moist. So that's how the name tussie-mussie came to be. But a tussie-mussie, nosegay, posy, whatever you want to call it, is a small bouquet of flowers, often including herbs. Each flower has a symbolic meaning. The combined flowers and their meanings are meant to be a message to the recipient. So it's great care is given in creating one of these. This one that I created, I did not take that care. I just used a bunch of flowers that I happen to have. They are often surrounded by lace doily or and a ribbon, and of course they're given as a message to the recipient. In this particular case, this is a picture of a tussie-mussie that was created. It is in a posy holder. The stems are put into a posy holder, and I have two examples on the bottom of posy holders. At that time, they were very elaborate. They were made of gold and silver, ivory, porcelain, other precious metals that could be used. They were typically had a pin on them so that they could be pinned to the clothing. They would hold a little bit of water to help the flowers survive, or they would actually have be a bracelet so you could wear it on your wrist. In this example, I just wanted to go through what these flowers might mean. So in the center, we have white roses, and they symbolize the heart of an unacquainted love. That typically it's given to a maiden, and the pink flush of it is her girlish blush. Violets are next. They symbolize modesty, faithfulness, humility, loyalty, and simplicity. Also means I return your love. and it appealed to the Victorians' notion of the ideal woman. And the other flower that's in here is baby's breath, symbolizes everlasting love. And this was probably given from a admirer to a young maiden. Now, in addition to the meanings of the flowers, the way the Tussie Mussy or posy was held had meaning as well. So sending flowers and receiving flowers was a way to fend off or attract suitors. So if a suitor declared his devotion by sending a rose, the recipient could say, express disdain with a yellow carnation or straw to request a union. To express adoration, a suitor could send dwarfed sunflowers. Depending upon the way you receive a bouquet, it has meaning as well. So if you receive the bouquet and held it at heart level, it means that you're accepting, you're happy and you're accepting the flowers. If it's being held pointed down, then that means rejection. It could also indicate a yes or no response. If it's received with the right hand, it means yes. If you put out your left hand and receive it, that's a no. And flowers held to the lips means yes. And if you pull off a petal and throw it to the ground, that means no. And of course, a wilted bouquet has an obvious message. So imagine a moment that a messenger shows up at the door of your elegantly appointed Victorian home and hands you a small ribbon wrap bouquet, obviously hand assembled from somebody's garden. As a wealthy inhabitant of the 19th century, you'd rush to your flower dictionary to decode the meaning behind the arrangement. So, how does a Victorian maiden interpret the bouquet delivered to her 19th birthday? I do have a copy of a letter that a maiden wrote in June of 1836 to her closest friend, describing what she felt when she received a bouquet. And it says, "My dear Anne, imagine my delight when upon occasion of the afternoon of my 19th birthday, a bouquet was delivered from the object of my enamored affections. The composition was elegant and beautiful, but the message sent a blush to my cheeks. He sent a red carnation, meaning pure and ardent love, blue violets for affection, pansies for thoughts, sweet William for smile, iris for message, and hawthorn for hope. All of these were surrounded by fern for sincerity and sweet geranium leaves for preference. Who could be more fortunate than I? The gift of an already well-used dictionary from my brother last Christmas has proved invaluable to identify the flowers contained in this message and to correctly decode the appropriate meanings. The sentiments of meanings allowed me to form a botanical response to his professed interest." Now she's received this and now she wants to respond to him, and she will respond to him with a boutonniere that she will wear at a dinner for which they will both attend. So moving on, constraint will be appropriate for fear of showing return of my true affection too soon. At the dinner party tonight, I shall carry a dainty nosegay with the answer to his floral message. I will gather daisies, for I will think of sweet marjoram for blushes, sent with appropriate modest decorum, of course. Goldenrod for indecision, with a few coneflowers for hope, and sprigs of lavender for faithfulness, tucked in for fear he may become discouraged without a sign of encouragement from me, and sent with endearing affection from your closest friend. So I thought that really described the whole process that one would use during that time in receiving a bouquet and how one would respond. So that was a nice way for folks to communicate during that period of time. But nice, all good things come to an end, and the Victorian era was coming to a close at the end of the 1900s, and went right into World War I. So at that time, florography pretty much vanished. Folks and nations were shifting their attention from the war and the resulting aftermath of the war. Conservatories were either damaged during the war or they were being used for food rather than flowers. But at the time, and the years later, the flowers were used to celebrate special occasions. They continue to do that to this day. Flower of the month, just as we have a birthday stone, we have a flower of the month. And those flowers have special meaning when used during celebrations of birthdays and anniversaries and other things as well. The opposite side of the handout that Andrew is sending you has a listing of all the months and their flowers with their meanings, just for your perusal. One of the things that has changed are funerals for today. Often donations are made in lieu of flowers and in lieu of the real elaborate floral arrangements that we used to see at funerals. The only place where we still use flowers lavishly are in wedding ceremonies. So let's take a look at weddings. Flowers play an important role at weddings. In bridal folklore, brides entwined orange blossoms in bouquets to ensure fertility. They carried white lilacs for innocence, and they tucked herbs in their bouquets, rosemary for remembrance and dill for lust. Flower girls scattered petals down the aisles to create a path of love and beauty that will carry the bride into her new life. At her wedding in 1858, the oldest daughter of Queen Victoria, who was called Princess Victoria, carried a sprig of myrtle. Now, that myrtle was taken from a plant that was planted by Queen Victoria that she had received from her own mother-in-law. Myrtle symbolizes good luck and love in marriage. Myrtle, the use of myrtle in bouquets has carried on through today, and marriages of the royal brides to this day. At the royal wedding, Catherine Middleton in 2015 carried sprigs of myrtle in her bouquet, and that myrtle came from that same plant from Queen Victoria. She also chose other flowers that had special meaning in her bouquet. She carried lily of the valley to symbolize the return of happiness, sweet william for gallantry, hyacinths for consistency of love, ivy for fidelity, marriage, friendship, affection, and of course, the myrtle was the symbol of marriage and love. So, does the practice of carrying tussie-mussies or giving tussie-mussie continue? Well, in 2005, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were carrying nosegays to an engagement. I don't know what the engagement was, but nevertheless, they were carrying them. Today, our desire to give gifts that have special meaning and are unique and personalized continues. I would think that we could continue using the language of flowers to communicate our feelings and express sentiments without words. If one is to use a tussie-mussie or give a nosegay or a posy that had special meaning, one would want to make sure that they had written cards to include with that so that the recipient knew what the sentiments were. Now, there are many, many books out that I have purchased and also have read that have tussie-mussies for every imaginable occasion. Confirmations, a new job, a new home, new baby, even sad occasions, a miscarriage, for example, the death of a friend. These bouquets all have meanings, but we would need to include a card that would say the meaning of each of these flowers so the recipient would understand what the sentiment was that you were sending. So I think a tussie-mussie could be a perfect gift. So with that, I have a tussie-mussie for you. In this bouquet, we have a bellflower, a lavender, pink hydrangea, parsley, daisy fleabane, purple leaf sage, and rosemary. And all these flowers combined mean thank you. Thank you for your attention and thank you for joining us today on Zoom.
All right, thank you so much, Lace. What a fantastic presentation, and yeah, a lot to think about. I wonder how many of us will go out and buy dictionaries now in order to kind of revive this tradition. So if anybody does have questions, please feel free to send them to us, and we'll be happy to answer them. You covered this a little bit before regarding the basil, but somebody asked, is the language of flowers international? Will it have the same meaning in every country? So,
No, it does not. And I just use basil as an example, but uh, the little that I know, um, flowers have different meanings depending upon the country that you're in and the part of the world that you're in. And the flowers are grown in different parts of the world are also going to have different meanings as well. Tropical plants from Africa or South America are going to have a different meaning than they would for us here.
Lady Montague Wharton, what was her exposure to harems? I wonder how that came about.
Well, she lived in the country for 2 years, and I'm not sure if she actually visited them. Perhaps her husband did, since it was a harem. I really don't know.
All right, let's see here. It's a little bit different off the topic, but do you know any flowers that are dangerous to pets, particularly cats?
Um, yes, I do. I don't know one. I mean, I know Lily for sure. But one of our presentations that's coming up in the next probably 6 months is a talk on flowers and trees and plants that are dangerous to animals, cats and dogs in particular. I happen to be a dog lover. We have a dog, and I'm very careful about the plants that we have in the house and also outside. So I will be creating a presentation on that topic within the next 6 months. So there are other sources for the person who asked the question. The AKC has a list of plants that are harmful to pets. I would suggest that resource. Just go online and ask for the AKC website for dangerous plants for pets.
Um, you didn't cover it, but can you talk a little bit about the tulip craze that happened in Denmark? Did that have any relation to this kind of language of flowers, or was that something a little bit different?
I really can't speak to that. I don't know.
Uh, it seemed like a lot of what you talked about had to deal with the Victorian era. Did any of that translate over into American culture?
Well, yes, as I mentioned, there were 98 florography dictionaries during that same period in the United States. From the 1850s to the 1920s, there were at least 98 different dictionaries. So I would say yes, that it did transfer to this country, probably not to the extent that it did in Europe, in England in particular, in the upper class in England. And again, it's probably for the wealthy, an activity for the wealthy.
What are your favorite types of flowers?
Well, for indoors, I have orchids and begonias primarily. And outdoors, perennials. I do have a pretty nice perennial garden that I enjoy. But peonies certainly is one of the flowers that it's one of my favorites, both indoor and out, because the fragrance is beautiful and it is a lovely flower. And of course, Christmas trees.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. Anything you'd like to close with before we end?
No, just that I enjoy doing this. I'm sorry for the complication with the zooming at the beginning. And I do recommend, we have probably 15 other topics that we have folks presenting on. And I think that Andrew, you have a list of those. So we encourage you to peruse that list and see if there are other topics that your group might be interested in.
Sure, and I'll post a link to your website again in the chat. So that does have a list of all the programs and a lot of resources as well. So please visit the Rutgers Master Gardeners of Hunterdon County for a wealth of information. We really appreciate you speaking with us today, Lace, for a very informative presentation. And maybe it's something, the hobby that some of us might consider taking up. You know. But I'd just like to close with everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Andrew.